So thank you for having me. My name is Mark Sadler from AnyVision. I'm going to talk a little bit about how AnyVision is tackling ethical facial recognition. There is a lot of facial recognition in the market, but we have tried and have always tried to steer within the boundaries of legality and within the boundaries of where different markets allow us to operate. So with me today is my colleague, Ziv Tsarfati. He's the VP of Architecture and Engineering. And my name is Mark Sadler. I'm a Director of Product Management in AnyVision. So what are we going to show you today? Just a little bit about AnyVision, just so that you can get a brief background. I've only got 30 minutes, so I have to squeeze quite a bit in. I'm going to give you a very high-level product overview, and I'm going to avoid slides completely and go to demos and live demos, because I believe it will be a good interactivity to give you live demos. Any kind of questions is very welcome, and then you can see for yourself what we're doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about integration and how we utilize Intel's technology as well. So firstly, AnyVision. AnyVision is a company which is about 7 years old now. It's based on tens of years of research, which is dealing with AI and deep learning. And we focus our company on computer vision. Computer vision is where we've started, and we've started to focus, and we focus on what we call the person. So the person might be body, it might be the face itself, it might be what's attached to the body, but we're focusing our company on people. So as we go forward, we're adding different technologies, and we're adding things coming forward, such as pose and different behavioral mechanisms as well as we go through. The company is backed by quite large VC investors, and they've actually, in the last round, invested $235 million, which is one of the largest computer vision investments that we know of in the markets. We have over 500 customers globally, and we operate all over the world. They are varying different customers, and those customers can be very much on the security and safety type side, but they can be things like casinos as well, or places where you might be looking for lost children, and all different kinds of use cases. We do deeply invest in our research. So all of the AI networks is our own networks, and we have over 20 PhDs, and we make agreements with all different kinds of institutions where they get our assistance and we get their assistance as well. We have been tested recently. We submitted towards NIST, which is one of the authorities in terms of facial recognition. And you can see we were tested as one of the leading Western European countries, companies in the world. So what do we actually have, and what I'm going to talk about in terms of our portfolio today are two parts of the portfolio. The first one is touchless access control, and the second one is watchlist alerting. Both of them are based on the same technologies and the same neural networks within the basis of the actual application. Both of them use our vectors to be able to look up and see whatever is in front of the camera, and look up in extremely fast speeds, which is at real-time speeds, what is in front of the camera compared to the database of vectors that we're looking at. Touchless access control allows us to layer on top of existing access control systems and be able to put the biometrics identity of somebody's face in through the access control system. So basically all we're doing is taking somebody's face, which we've got as vectors at edge devices, or we could do central architectures. That depends on how the customer wants to work with us. And then we look that up and then provide the badge IDs back towards the access control system so that we can provide that access, and the access control is the final authority to allow the person in or not. Whereas the watchlist alerting allows us to identify people we know, such as people that we're looking for, or opposite way, people we don't know. So if you want to say only employees are allowed to go into this area, then anybody who isn't on that list, then they can be identified as unknown individuals into an area. So we can identify people we know and people we don't know. What I'm going to be demonstrating for you today is the watchlist alerting, because that's what I have time for, and to give you some examples towards that. So now just to talk a little bit about the ethical facial recognition. When we built our platform, it goes all the way across the development timeline and all the way to the end customer, where ethical facial recognition becomes as part of the process. So from the collection of the data in the development environment, which is what is used to feed the neural networks and to be able to power those, to be able to have diverse data sets, such as all different tones of skin, all different genders, all different age ranges. You have to have a wide diversity and range of data so that you are classed as non-biased, and that you can have data which isn't scraped from the internet. So I know there's a lot of different vendors out there which will take Facebook images, Instagram images, all of the public data out there, and they'll scrape that and they'll start using it within their tools. We don't do that. We use our own generated materials, and it isn't taken from all of these public sources in I'm not sure if it's a legal way or not, but in a way which isn't ethical. In terms of the way that we use our data, we actually work in real world conditions. So when we're using it, we don't try and train it so that you're looking at one direction, that you have to make multiple images of multiple faces in different directions. We train it so that whatever source comes in, we're trying to identify from all different angles, from all different qualities of images, so that we don't have any issue with all the different world conditions. In terms of watchlist creation, there is multiple ways of looking at watch lists, and watch lists, what goes onto the watch list is very much to do with how an operation wants to run. So that's how a company will run within their own data, such as people who will only put on the watch list legally authorized by a judge, and then they will only put it on there on specific sites at specific dates, and will only put it there for a specific time. And those are parts of our application. We've worked with our customers, we've worked with those local regions, and we've had those requirements, and we've put those things into our product to allow it to legally only have the people who they're allowed to put onto those watch lists into the product. On top of that, we can work in multiple ways. So the product itself can store history, it's retention time. So it can store months of data of people's recognition and vectors. But if a customer decides, no, we don't want to store any data, we only want, when somebody comes in, to check if that person is against the watch list, we will literally delete anything after the point which was in memory and only in memory, which we've looked at vector, and we've compared it to somebody. We haven't related it to any real world data which we can know who this person is. If we compare it to that person and then it's a hit, we will keep that piece of information and then store. Otherwise, it's volatile and come out of memory by that point in time. So we've got multiple ways of working with our modes of operation so that we work within those privacy modes. In terms of user consent, in terms of service, again, we work within our, for instance, access control world, whereby only people who give consent will be added into the access for those doors, and only those people will be analyzed to go and allowed to go through those doors if they want to. Otherwise, we won't actually use their information. And the terms of service is always there as part of the way that we work with all of our customers, so that we are never classed as the one who's processing. We very often get asked if we are going to go to the cloud, and we are deciding where to do those things in the market. But most of the time, we actually deploy on-prem because we give the customer the ability to decide where to keep that data, how to store it, how to manage it, and we don't want involvement on that data unless they ask us to be. Okay, I'll stop there for a second if there's questions, and then I'll go into some demos if that's all right.
Yeah, Mark, I've got a question just on the data sets that you were talking about. You mentioned that you're not scraping public data sets, which is good to hear. What data, these training, in order to train a model, you generally need quite a lot of data. Where have you sourced your training data from?
So I'm not the expert. I think Ziv will be able to help with that. But what I know from what I've been told is that we actually generate a lot of data. So there's a lot of different models where you can generate images and generate faces, and we self-generate a lot of our imagery inside of the systems. Other than that, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ziv, there are some data sets which are allowed to be purchased. And other than that, that's what I know. Ziv, if you want to come in, if there's anything else.
Yes, there are also some public data sets which are allowed to be used, and some private data sets which has a user consent, which you can purchase for a fee. But most of our training data is augmented and generated.
Right. Okay. So it's mostly not actually. So you're training your system mostly on faces that don't actually exist and aren't of actual people, and then using that to match against to detect whether they really exist, whether they are people. Okay, that's an interesting approach.
Again, when we're looking at training data sets, and you probably know neural networks, they don't care who the person is. They care learning how to identify people and everything about people. That's what the neural networks are looking for. So I'll show you in some of the demonstrations how we can get to clarity of data and how we work in real world data with the real world.
Yeah. Okay. I'm also interested in the user consent side of things. So, and what you classify as consent. Are you aware of? So the customers who deploy this, and maybe we'll get to that in the demo. Is this being used in a public arena, or is this purely in private? Like you're mentioning things like making sure that people who are authorized to go into an area, so if that's a private lab inside my company, then I can sort of understand how that would work. But if it's being used on the exterior of buildings, for example, to say whether or not someone can come in because they're an employee, I'm interested to know if you are actually looking at public areas with this system.
So most of our customers, and again, this is a regional thing, so every region has their own different legalities, but most of our systems are not external. Most of our systems are internal. And I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a casino, and casinos, they do multiple use cases. And one of those kind of use cases is actually Gamblers Anonymous type use cases. And to protect people who shouldn't go into those casinos, because the casinos actually get fined a lot of money for letting people who are gamblers in them. So in that case, as a member of a casino, you have to sign up for a membership if you're allowed to come in, and you have to agree that you will allow yourself to be facial analyst recognized. Otherwise, they won't let you in as a member. So when you talk about consent, there is all different ways of doing consent in these arenas. In terms of access control, for example, if you don't want to use the access control lanes, there's always a badge lane, which has got no access control if you want to go there. So they allow their staff, their employees, whoever wants to go without those kind of badge lanes. There are all different ways legally to work with the customers and the DPIAs, the local data authorities, to allow these kind of technologies.
Okay, it's good to clarify, since that you framed your presentation in terms of ethics. I'm trying to understand how you're thinking about ethics, and that has certainly helped. Thanks.
Yep.
And Mark, I have one quick question. I think before we move over to demos, That is, for the last 18 months, the whole world has been faced with a COVID-19 pandemic, where most regions have mandatory face mask requirements, especially indoors where you say your systems are being used. How has that affected the technology, the software, the facial recognition?
Well, it affected it a lot. The pandemic affected all of us a lot at some point. In the beginning of the pandemic, we actually diverted our attentions to specifically trying to assist with COVID, which there's some public stories, and I can probably forward them to you as well. And what we developed was the ability to detect people who were not wearing face masks. That was the first thing. And those people who were not wearing face masks within a hospital, and this was before we had any kind of proper vaccines and before any of those kind of things, we would detect, and it's what we call association. We've used that feature, and I'll show you it actually later on in a demo. Anybody who's been with somebody for more than a period of time in the same camera view who wasn't wearing a mask, and this was specifically for hospital staff, whereby a hospital staff member would report in, 2 days, 3 days later, and they said, well, they've caught COVID. They went back in the history to see who they'd interacted with over very quickly in our system over the last few days, and you could know who would have a chance of having caught that COVID over that time. Now, our system has been optimized for facial recognition, both when people are wearing it and when they're not wearing it. When they're wearing it, we even do analysis for access control, for instance, to tell people to put the mask on before we will allow them to access a location, and then we'll recognize them to be able to access that location. Again, all of this is configurable to decide if you just give them a warning and still allow them access, or you don't allow them access until you put the face mask on. But we actually created and built networks trained for those face masks. And when we talk about augmenting data, it's not that difficult to add to a lot of the data sets that we had, a lot of different face mask types, which it took a good few months to retrain all of the networks to be able to recognize and to be able to do that. But we did do all the retraining.
That's very interesting. So as mentioned earlier, the data set you guys are using is primarily generated data that you guys did. So you regenerated your data, your humanoid images with face coverings, and then just retrain the model, and that compensated for the facial recognition of having just half of a face.
Again, I'm not a PhD. That's where they started. And then they had to do some adjustments, right? Because now you've got less face. You've got 30% of the face, let's say, or 40%. We were already good. We designed it to work with lower networks and all these different views. But they also added and augmented the adjustments into the network to be able to improve with those views.
Okay, that's very cool. I'm interested in seeing some of the demos.
Sure. So,
can I jump in for just one last quick question? Sorry,
sure.
I know we've been firing away here for a second. I just wanted to ask if you could maybe clarify just a little bit on your previous slide in relation to ethics. You mentioned legal a number of times, and I wanted to just try to maybe have you tease apart how you are approaching the difference in having maybe an ethical capture versus what would be strictly just legal, right? So to me, it seemed like your definition of those two things was conflated, and I wanted to just maybe allow you the opportunity to pull that apart a little bit.
Okay, so in terms of ethics, we very much try to work within what we are looking at as the opt-in model in as many markets as possible. So that's our basic way of working. But then ethically, the use case that is justified is what we will work towards in a market. So if the market, which is a military market, or let's say a critical infrastructure market where you're talking about nuclear sites, or you're talking about a police force, their use case is a different use case for border control and for types of terrorist activities, allows within the legality of that market to adjust the way that the product is used, then we will allow it to be used in that way so that you have more history, and we will happily support whatever those use cases are required for, are allowed in that market. We also have an ethics board within our own company, which only supplies and supports to markets which are allowed within the organization, okay? So every deal actually goes through the ethics boards to understand if that market is a market that we are allowed to supply to, and if those use cases are use cases that we're allowed to supply to within the legality of those environments. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, it does cross over, but it needs to be taken one into account and from the other. So I'll just give you a very quick taster on the access control version of the touchless access control, and then I'll come into the actual watchlist alerting, which I'm not sure how much time we're going to have, but I will show you live. So in terms of the access control, this device here is what we call a point. It's a tablet device. You can see here, as he walks up to the device, it gives a feedback, which is an image of himself. It allows him to guide himself towards the door. As soon as he has access to the door, then it can give him messaging, or it can just grant the access and let him straight through the gate within seconds. The messaging is quite important in some markets, and in other markets it's less important, but it does a whole bunch of different activities, things like liveness checking, things like we talked about mask and mask updates, but it will work with the access control to be able to provide that. Now, we have all different types of devices which can support those flows, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but there are all different edge type form factors which can work within that level. Over here, you can see another type of a form factor, which is literally someone, as you can see, with a mask, walks up to a gate. This is part of the COVID restrictions were put in. And as you can see, there was some entrance and exit gates, so people were not clashing at this point, whereas previously they would allow both entrance and exit to the same gates. He walks up to those gates. These are just standard CCTV cameras, and they open as soon as he approaches those gates. Okay, I'm gonna just close that for now. And what I'm gonna show you here is just a few of our test cameras from our office inside of our organization. What you're seeing in front of you right now is a whole bunch of detections, okay? Detections from our office of all different streams. You can see Ziv is here. These are recorded streams of people in our office, and you can see all different kinds of viewpoints, occlusions, 90 degrees, 45 degrees. You can see all different actual qualities of these imagery. None of these is actually triggering anything yet, okay? This is just detections through the system. And we train the networks to detect as much as possible of faces in every angle possible. That doesn't mean that in the end it's going to come out to be a recognition, but it means that you've got good data to try and match against other data as best as possible. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you my home camera here. This is a camera which I've got connected over here. If I show you my hand, hello, this is me live. When I put that camera across here, which I'll just minimize that a little bit. Now that you've seen that's the camera over here, I'm just going to go over there. I'm going to pass it just to see me over here to the side. So the first thing you'll see is you'll see me coming up here for some of these recognitions, the detections inside of the system. I'm going to just move it over again so that you don't get any more of these detections. This is me coming in with different detections. Now, I can add this as the thing that I want to be detected on in the future. So if I wanted to, I can add myself as a subject very quickly from here. I can also add myself, if I look at the watch list, and again, you see all these faces, these are generated faces. I can add here as a single subject from multiple different images. So if you've only got an image of yourself, I can add myself as an image. I've got myself in multiple years old. Somewhere I was actually looking quite young and different. And somewhere I am a bit older and now. So I'm going to start with the current image, and then we can go back in time if we want to as we go through. This is just an image which I'm uploading. It gives you some kind of quality score to the face so that you get an understanding if it's a good image or not. And I'm going to actually add myself to wanted for crimes because I am a master criminal and don't tell anybody. When I've added myself inside of here, it does two things. Number one, if you see here, it's actually gone back across all of the history that already exists in this database and related that image to all of these other images, views, points, everything else that is in this database that I've been using and testing over the last few days and different kind of times that I'm using it with customers. So I can actually see a full history of as many cameras that I've got streaming into here as I want. I can also actually upload video, which is offline video. So a lot of police forces use it for what they call forensics. When you've got a scene and you're going to go back across all of those different videos and you want to upload all of those in one go and look for one person over hundreds of video hours, you can do that in seconds with our system, okay? But what I'm going to do right now...
So Mark, just to break in there, so because you've brought up that example, so are you saying that you've got customers who are policing agencies who take video feeds of a scene, i.e. somewhere where there's just general members of the public, and those videos are processed using your system to look to identify a known individual within a crowd of unknown individuals?
In some arenas, yes, they take video and they upload for known individuals to identify for a known individual in those videos.
Okay, and they're matching. So yeah, okay, yep. So they're looking for a known individual with a group. So it's not matching. It's matching against. Okay, yeah. I'm just looking at the matching database. So you're taking unknown people and matching against a database of known individuals. Okay.
That's right. So what I'm going to do now is I will point myself again towards the camera. I put the camera up just so you can see when I'm pointing it. Again, I'm not doing any specific angle or anything specific. And this whole environment is streaming a camera, which is a camera to my cloud environment, which is for my testing. And then I'm just streaming back down and I'm getting real-time alerts, which is what you saw popping up over there, of me when I added myself to that watch list as a master criminal. This was the specific instance that I was added as unauthorized at that specific point in time. So you can see myself as unauthorized, and I can now carry on with different use cases. So from that image, I could use that, or I could use another image, or I could sign up via one of these specific images to be able to look for a known individual. Now, known individuals can come from multiple sources, like you were talking about. It might come from some imagery that the police force is looking for. It might come from a legal database, such as people who have signed up to be excluded from a gambling location, those kind of places. The next scenario I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to change my camera. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this edit subject, I'm going to delete myself so you can see myself deleted. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my camera which I've got at home and I'm going to actually change that camera and move it to what I call my home employees only office. Okay, so if I just now, I'll just refresh that so you can see. You'll see I've added my camera here, and then when I've added it, it's actually restarted it, so it allows me to now only be detected if I'm unknown. So if I'm not in the database, so I've removed myself from those databases. So again, I'm going to just show you the camera so that you can see when I've poked my head across. And this time, when I'm going to show you the camera, which you'll see, this time I'll be popped up as an unknown individual. Why? Because I've removed myself from that watch list. So you can decide who's allowed in an area, and if anybody who isn't in that area, you can get an unknown notification. When I get that unknown notification, I can actually add myself, if I want, back to, let's say, as a temporary guest or as an employee. And then when I'll put myself again as an employee. And then when I've added myself, the next time that I'll come on, it will no longer notify about me. Why? Because it knows me, and it won't notify me as an unknown individual. So if I come there, I can come across and I can do that. And this time you'll see it doesn't pop up a notification, and it has this green bar. I'm a known individual. Okay. Now there are many, many scenarios that we can do, but I want to show you.
Can I ask another quick question here, somewhat quick question. So in the training data that you use as part of the system, how do you measure or demonstrate kind of, I guess, ethnic diversity, skin tone changes? Obviously, that's a challenge in a lot of training data. How do you demonstrate that you're actually doing that? To be honest, I'm going to be kind of blunt about that question. Like, how is that data generated so that you ensure that you have that diversity in your data set?
I actually have a whole white paper which is published by the scientists, the PhDs, of how they check and train the data set. I'm not, I guess, the most authority on that one. So from what I know is that having the breadth and depth of that data set so that it's trained enough, and so that when our customers, and that's the important part, when we've used it with our customers, say, well, they don't see a difference in those data sets in terms of the bias. Again, in terms of the way that we identify, there is no bias when we're looking for somebody who is lighter skin or a darker skin inside of our networks, then we can prove that bias because we've actually entered public. There was a plug. I can actually try and find it for you, and I'll pass it to you afterwards. A public demonstration of that, where algorithms were tested against each other, and we've entered and even sponsored those at the specific conferences. So how do we prove it? It's very difficult to prove. It's our data, right? It's our neural networks, unless somebody else comes in and completely tests it. But we do these public conferences where we test it against other algorithms, and we show as best as we can that that's how the data set is working that way.
Okay. I mean, obviously, coming from the source data set, and you guys, what you generate a fair amount of it. So, there probably is a statistical number that I look forward to seeing this white paper, because I'm guessing that's going to hopefully answer more questions than I think you have readily available to you. So thank you.
I can pass you the white paper. I can also pass you the conference that we attended and the results and the different elements where we were sponsoring all those for anti-bias specifically.
I got a question too. How do you do liveliness checks? So avoiding that somebody just holds up a picture of something.
Yeah. So I haven't got that to be able to show you here right now, but I can talk to you about that. We have two methods. One is via 2D, and the other is via 3D. 2D is actually programmatically analyzing the 2D stream from a standard camera. The 3D, which you could see on the tablet, so when you saw the camera on the tablet, actually has a 3D sensor, which is recognizing three-dimensional shapes on a person's face, and we can actually know if somebody is live or not live from that. So we've got two mechanisms. One is slightly better than the other. to be able to analyze those different liveliness detections.
Thank you.
We also have, Mark, an SDK for mobile phones, where you need to have like an authentication for a specific user. Then there's a third type of liveness detection that we are doing, is by displaying all sorts of colors and shapes on the actual smart device, the cell phone screen. And then we analyze the refractions of these patterns and lights using a 2D camera used in any phone, present in any phone, to check the liveness and whether you are a 3D person or face, or just replay a tag or a printed image.